Have you ever wondered what are the specifications of the counterpart brand of your laptops and computers? And that is why for today's video we're going to compare my laptop's CPU, which is the Intel Core i5-8265U, and its counterpart brand, which is the nearest amount of multi-thread score, which is the AMD Ryzen 5 3400 GE. In order to do that, first is we're going into websites that can compare two processors at the same time. And some of these websites are versus.com and also askgeek.io. In here, you can compare and contrast mostly anything that ranges from mobile devices up to the fruits and soccer. Now we're going to input my CPU name, which is the Intel Core i5-8265U. And we're also gonna type the counterpart brand, which is the AMD Ryzen 5 3400 GE. Click compare, and as you can see here, there is much distinctive information of the comparison between the two, and its comparison ranges from its features, general information, performance, memory, and lastly its benchmarks. And now we're going to compare the differences between the Intel Core i5-8265U and the AMD Ryzen 5 3400 GE. Now we're going to start with its features. As you can see here, the AMD Ryzen 5 3400 GE and Intel Core i5-8265U has both the multi-threading technology, the AES, the AVX, and the NX bit. But as you can see, there are features that the Intel Core i5-8265U has that the AMD Ryzen do not have, just like the F16C. F16C is used to speed up tasks such as adjusting the contrast of an image or adjusting volume. Same with the MMX, which is related to the image rendering processes, and also the FMA3. Now let's move to the general information. As you can see, the AMD Ryzen 5 3400 GE has a semiconductor size of 12 nanometers. Well, for the Intel Core i5-8265U, it has 14 nanometers semiconductor size. Both has integrated graphics, and both also have the clock speed of 300 MHz. However, the thermal design for the AMD Ryzen 5 is 35 watts, and for the Intel Core is 15 watts. Also both has 12 DirectX version, and for the GPU turbo, the AMD Ryzen 5 has 1300 MHz, and for the Intel Core i5-8265U, we have 1100 MHz. The AMD Ryzen 5 3400 GE was launched back in July 7, 2019, while the Intel Core i5-8265U was launched August 21, 2018. For the architecture code name of the AMD Ryzen 5340GE, it is called Zen Plus. And for the Intel Core i5-8265U, it is the Whiskey Lake. For the market value, the AMD Ryzen 5 cost $299.99, while on the Intel Core i5-8265U, it costs $558. Due to the fact that Intel Core i5-8265U is not sold separately, you have to forcibly buy the whole device. Let's move to the performance. For the performance, the AMD Ryzen 5 3400GE has the CPU speed of 4 times 3.3 GHz, while on the Intel Core i5-8265, we have CPU speed with 4 times 1.6 GHz. Both has the CPU threads of 8 and also the CPU cores of 4. However, AMD Ryzen 5 3400GE has an unlocked multiplier. An unlocked multiplier makes them easy to overclock, which makes you gain increased performance in games and other apps. The L1 cache for the AMD Ryzen 5 3400GE is 384 kilobytes, and for the Intel Core i5-8265U, we have 256 KB. The L2 for the AMD is 2 MB, and for the L2 for the Intel Core is we have 1 MB. For the L3 cache is we have 4 MB, and for the Intel Core we have the 6 MB. For the L2 core, we have 0.5 MB per core for the AMD Ryzen 5 3400GE. While for the Intel Core i5-8265U, we have 0.25 MB per core. And for the L3 core of the AMD Ryzen 5 3400GE, we have 1 MB per core. While on the Intel Core i5-8265U, we have the 1.5 MB per core. With a turbo speed of 4 GHz, AMD Ryzen 5 3500GE is the same as the Intel Core i5-8265U turbo clock speed, which is also 4 GHz. The base frequency for the AMD Ryzen 5 3400GE is 3.3 GHz, while on the Intel Core i5 is 1.6 GHz. For the CPU temperature, we have 95 degrees Celsius for the AMD Ryzen 5 3400GE and 100 Celsius CPU temperature for the Intel Core i5-8265U. Both has the same amount of GPU clock speed, which is 300 MHz, and for the GPU turbo, the AMD Ryzen 5 3400GE amounts up to 1300 MHz, while on the Intel Core i5-8265U amounts up to 1100 MHz. And now moving on to the memory. For the AMD Ryzen 5 3400GE, we have the RAM speed of 2933 MHz, while the Intel Core i5-8265U has the RAM speed of 2400 MHz. The maximum memory bandwidth for the AMD Ryzen 5 is 43.71 GB per second. For the Intel Core i5-8265U is 37.5 GB per second. The maximum memory size of the AMD Ryzen 5 3400GE is 64 GB, while on the Intel Core i5-8265U is 32 GB. Both has the same max memory channels, which is 2 However, the ECC memory support is available on the AMD Ryzen 5 3400GE. Meanwhile, it is not available on the Intel Core i5-8265U. For the RAM speed, the AMD has the RAM speed of 2933 MHz, while the Intel Core has the RAM speed of 2400 MHz. And now we're going to move to the benchmarks for the AMD Ryzen 5 3400GE. It has the passmark benchmarking single thread mark score of 2320, and for the passmark CPU mark, it has the 8955. Meanwhile, for the Intel Core i5-8265U, passmark single thread mark is 2125, passmark CPU mark which has 6108. Geekbench for single core is amount to 908, and for the multi-core 2803. 3D Mark Fire Strike Physics score 2529. For the Compute Bench 1.5 Desktop Face Detection 26.164. For the Compute Bench 1.5 Desktop Ocean Surface Simulation, it has 296.492. These are some of the gaming benchmark rates that varies depending on the quality and graphics that are used by the users. As you can see here, as the graphics improves, the cores also declines. And this is for the Intel Core i5-8265. For the Borderlands, for the Fallout 76 2018, for the Apex Legends 2019, and for the Fortnite 2018. So in conclusion, if you're a gamer looking for a budget-friendly processor, AMD Ryzen 5 3400GE is a perfect fit for your needs. With its clock speed higher by 3% compared to Intel Core i5-8265U, it can render graphics in a much faster rate. Also, this type of processor has an unlocked multiplier which makes the system to overclock much easier. It has a maximum memory twice the capacity of the other one. If performance-wise, AMD Ryzen 5 3400GE is much better to choose, since it has 9% better performance in single thread and 47% better in its multi-thread. But if you're looking for something more efficient, the Intel Core i5-8265U is ready to aid you. Because of its low consumption with 2.3 times lower than the AMD Ryzen 5 3400GE, there's no denying it can cut some of your electrical expenses and save much more energy. Not to mention, there are also exclusive features that the Intel Core i5-8265U has compared with the other one. Being able to have FMA3, MMX, F16C, and higher SSE version, users that aim to use device in image rendering, video and audio editing can have the results much faster.